Hello everyone. The title of my talk is Metaontological Impasse in Social Ontology, How Do We Move Forward? In the interest of our restricted time, I'm going to move quite quickly through things. I'll have to skate over some issues and just give the general shape of what I want to talk about. But hopefully there'll be enough to be at least reasonably clear about the moves that are being made. However, also just to state to start us off, this is a project in early stages, so I'm really keen to hear any thoughts people have about either issues that might be missed or things that can be clarified as move forward through this. So let's get going. Initially, some brief preliminaries. So I want to talk about social ontology and meta-ontology and the intersection of these things, how we can bring these things together in an interesting way. So, of course, people are familiar. Questions of social ontology aim to track how our theorizing about the social world connects to questions about the occupants of the world. That slightly unnatural phrasing is just a way of trying to be broadly neutral about how we talk about what ontology is. And what's meta-ontology? Well, meta-ontology examines the theoretical backdrop of the ontological project. And this can be in various different ways, for example, linguistic, epistemological, or methodological assumptions and approaches that rest in the background of what we're doing. The field has grown a great deal since Van Inwagen coined the term meta-ontology. Meta-ontology was also implicitly practiced before then. There was reflection about people's approaches to ontology. But one thing that's notable is that applications to social ontology are less common. And this may be in part because it's more common to approach social ontology from the social direction, investigating social activities and practices, and then move into ontology, than it is to move from ontology to the social questions. Why would we want to introduce meta-ontology? Well, one key reason that has been given in the past for, so to speak, going meta-ontological is intractable disagreement. In cases of intractability, so cases where we have a disagreement that does not seem to go anywhere, people get into their emplacements and there's no further movement, we may suspect that there is an implicit higher order disagreement going on. So there's a disagreement, the disagreement is higher order. It's not about the object level questions, but it's about the meta level questions. But this disagreement is implicit. So either the fact that this is about a higher order matter is not being made clear by those who are taking part, or further, it may not be clear even to those who are taking part that the dispute is higher order, not of lower order. Okay, that it's a meta level, not an object level disagreement. So a classic example of this is the composition debate. So the question, when do two simple objects compose a complex object? And we have different positions in this debate. Universalists who say composition always happens, that is, any two simples form a complex object. And nihilists, that is those who say composition never happens, no two simples form a complex object. They both lay claim to strong theories. Over time, these theories have been refined and improved against certain objections, and compelling reasons to choose between the mature versions of these theories are absent. So the thought is that the universalist and a nihilist may not recognize that they are in fact asking different questions. They have different assumptions in the background, they have different conceptions of the project they are engaged in, and therefore their disagreement is not about composition, it's a higher order disagreement about methodology, about approach. Now, it's been claimed by Johannes Himmelreich that there are implicit higher order disagreements going on in social ontology, okay, and that's where the interest comes in. Himmelreich identifies two different approaches that seem to be taking place in different examples of social ontology, which he calls the truthmaker view and the theory commitments view. I'm just going to call them truthmaker and theory commitments, slightly awkwardly. These are the two approaches I'm going to engage with. There are obviously other moves that could be made. In particular, one thing that isn't quite incorporated into what we're going to discuss here today yet, is grounding. So we may think there are some contributions that can make the debate going on, but I'm going to put that to one side. Anyway, once we have recognized there are these two approaches taking place, there's a question, what do we do next? Okay, recognizing the implicit higher order disagreement is not the end of the story, unless recognizing that dissolves the whole dispute. In this case, I don't think it's clear that it does. So the question is, can we derive any further lessons from this recognition? And that's what I want to try to do today. I want to look at the backdrops of these two approaches and try to claim that there is a difference in their suitability for doing social ontology. So let's get clearer on these two approaches, truth-maker and theory commitments. So here is my attempt to show somebody making something true. Problem about doing metaphysics, and particularly about doing methodology, is it's very hard to find appropriate pictures. So according to truth-maker, to engage in ontological inquiry about K, about some subject K, I'm going to stay really neutral about what that K is, whether we talk about concepts or terms or anything like that. To engage in ontological inquiry about K is to ask what makes K claims true. Okay, that's the basic question we want to answer. And the idea about this is that what makes a sentence true can vary in clarity. Okay, when I explain what makes something true, I might just try to basically repeat the same statement again, repeat the components of that statement, and talk about how they're related. But I might be able to do something a little bit deeper. I might be able to ask what it is at the basis of those things that makes the claims true. Okay, I can either give a somewhat unclear statement about what makes claims of that sort true, or I can get at the more fundamental aspect of what is going on. Look at what in the world is making these statements true. So in this picture, the concept of the truth-making relation is, of course, integral. We need the truth-making relation. We need to know what it is. And what it is supposed to be is a privileged metaphysical relation between world and word. Okay, so when I talk in terms of something, if I talk in terms of chairs, for example, what I'm looking for is what stuff in the world is making that statement true. And I might try to talk about chairs making it true, but that's not necessarily going to be clear. If I think that, for example, macroscopic objects don't provide any contribution to what's going on in the world, then I may say that the statement chairs exist, which is true, is made true only by microscopic particles, is made true only by subatomic particles that make up the chair. So these subatomic particles are bits of the world, and my language of chairs, my language of saying chairs exist, is the other side of the truth-making relation. Sometimes this is supplemented with a technical language, which custom tells us to call ontologies, or otherwise the language of the ontology room. Okay, this is the idea of a language where if we were going to only speak of the truth makers, we would use this language. Others have used the notion of that language as well, but it can play a role in truthmaker, but I'll come back to that later. So what are the marks of truthmaker in social ontology? I'm going to have to race through these. We see cases of people saying, when we see what the corporation is by its nature, we find behind the veil only individual agents. So we're trying to look at the corporation, look at what the things are that make the things true. Behind the veil are the truth makers. In the foreground are just how we speak about things. Or we see it might be the corporation qua legal person that is said literally to believe. Okay, we truly say that the corporation believes, but there is no entity there to be their subject of such attributions. Okay, there is nothing that qualifies in the backdrop behind this. We also get a statement in appealing to the idea of a group causal agent. The thought is that it can be true in this weak sense that the group is a causal agent. When this is true, this truth consists in fact about the relevant underlying structure. Okay, so the truth is nothing more than these more basic facts. The basic facts are what make true that weaker truth. And finally, a clearer statement. If the statements in question are true, but their truth makers involve nothing more than the instantiation of cognitive properties by individuals, then there are no group cognitive states in the relevant sense. Okay, these are indications of truth maker in social ontology, a combination of points that I've raised and those taken from Himmelreich. So, how about theory commitments? Well, the picture here is even less clear, so for theory commitments, to engage in ontological inquiry about K, again about topic, subject, concept, is to ask whether our theory is committed to quantifying over Ks. So we look at our theory and we ask whether this thing is necessary, whether it is required within the system. Okay, if we wanted to provide a strong theory of what it is to be a Wadsworth rotary spader and pulverizer, then we have to ask whether the various different parts are necessary for it. Not knowing what the rotary spader and pulverizer does, I wouldn't be well placed to engage in that analysis. But the most famous iteration of theory commitments asks whether our best theory is so committed. Okay, so we don't just look at theories in general, because there are lots of those. Instead, we want to look at our best theory and ask whether that needs to quantify over things of the kind we are looking at. So the concept of best theory, what we mean by that, and the concept of ontological commitment are integral to the approach. We need those things to make sense of this way of looking at things. Theory commitment has its origin in Quine, but I don't have the time to go into this, but I think we can see core elements of it in the work of some others who don't see themselves as Quinean, but still follow a similar kind of structure. So some marks of theory commitments operating in social ontology. Again, we'll rush through these. So we see the naturalist introduces a group cognitive state as well as the corresponding subject into her ontology only if such a hypothesized state does useful causal explanatory work, only if it is doing useful work within the theory. Interestingly, this is an example from somebody who was also picked out as showing use of TRUTHMAKER. So there are mixtures of the methods in some cases. We also get talk of group agents is not readily translatable into individualistic terms. Again, we can't translate into an idiom where we don't use those terms. This inference from collective rationality to group minds is, of course, subject to challenge if the rationality of the group can be entirely explained in terms of the individual actions of its members. We're looking for a better overall explanation phrased differently. And finally, another case here, reductionism does not adequately explain why attributions of intentionality to organizations work so well to predict and explain the actions of organizations in the absence of information about the intentional states of their members. So those are just some indications of where theory commitment seems to be operating in social ontology. Now, we'll have to move quickly through this, but questions about what is in the backdrop of these two different approaches? What can we say about these approaches to ask whether they are suited to what we're doing? Well, let's start with theory commitments. So what does it mean to give the notions of best theory and of ontological commitment a central role? Well, my claim is that the first notion of best theory relies on a network of interdependent concepts, because our best theory is our most successful overall. So whether a concept is useful within the theory is going to depend on the other resources we have available to us. Whether we can do useful work with it, whether it is well supported, depends on its relations to other concepts. Now, this means that each element in our ontology will have its place as a posit. Quine makes this point that posits are not restricted to theoretical entities, so-called theoretical entities like electrons. Everything can be seen as a posit, doing some kind of explanatory work. Okay, so each thing's place is reliant on its links to the rest of the theory, and those links may be very, very widespread. The second notion of ontological commitment also works at theory level, because what it means to be committed to Ks depends on the resources of the rest of the theory. Okay, I might, within a smaller confine of theory, think that I'm committed to something's existence, for example, properties. But then I might move into another region of theory and find something that will do my explanatory work alongside it. Say, for example, I've done my ontology of mathematics and decided that I need to accept sets. And then I might ask the question, well, maybe sets can do the work that I wanted properties to do for me. So what it means to accept something into one's ontology depends on what happens elsewhere in our theory. This means I want to say that theory commitment is centrally underpinned by epistemological and semantic holism. Okay, both what we are justified in including and what it means to include something depend upon the broader theory, depend upon the overall theory that we have. So here is a really brief indication of how you might visualize theory commitment's view. We have a theory at the top and a theory at the bottom, restatements, intended interpretations of the same theory. One of them might entail governments, corporations have minds, the other one does not entail that. And then we're comparing those two theories against one another to see which is most successful for us. How about TRUTHMAKER? Well, TRUTHMAKER, of course, relies on the truth-making relation. And what does this require? Well, a number of different things. So truth-making needs to link a theory-laden piece of language, something that's part of our ordinary way of speaking, linked to our other theoretical terms, to an independent portion of world. The truth-making term of the truth-making relation, says Armstrong, is a portion of reality. The relation has to be cross-categorial. It must be between language and world. Called it a word-world connection. Now, TRUTHMAKER, though, places no requirement that the terms of the metaphysical theory play the same theoretical role as their analogues, as Cameron points out. The interest is not in roles within a theory, the interest is in the nature of the thing. The interest is to look at the thing's nature. So we don't need to be able to say that our comparison is actually useful in the same sense as the one that we started with. And the final point is that truth-making is seen as an internal relation. The way that Armstrong puts this is that given a certain real object and a certain proposition in that order, then the truth-making relation is automatically determined, fixed, necessitated. Okay, so we take the bit of the world and that just gives us all of the information we need once we plug in different propositions or different sentences. Now, what this claims, I want to say, is that the internal focus and the focus on natures that is integral to TRUTHMAKER makes the analysis involved atomistic. We take some notion that we work with, we take some claims that are true, and we ask, what is the nature behind this stuff we're talking about? We talk about chairs, we say chairs exist. What is the nature of this thing we're talking about? And then we start focusing on the truth makers, which is what we're interested in all along. So here's a diagram of a similar kind of debate from previous 2 slides ago that is intended to show how the truth maker theorists see things. So we have on the left, we have the merely true statement that the UK government has said on many occasions, etc., etc. And on the right-hand side, we have the individual statements that are true, but perhaps more perspicuous. But the thing we care about is the base level stuff, the ground level things in the world. These are all made true, so the claim might go, by individual ministers, individual people who are making this statement true. Now we have 2 different kinds of truth, but we're not comparing the success of one theory to the other, the 2 different kinds of truth to the other. The reason we're interested in them is because of their joint link to what we really care about, the base level stuff. The stuff that is making true what's going on, the natures behind what we're discussing. So this has been obviously very, very quick, but what I want to say is that this gives us a reason for social ontology to employ theory commitments. Why? Well, because it should be accepted by all parties here that the subject of study is one that requires realizers in every instance, which just roughly what I mean here is that if group agents exist, it must be as part of a complex system of interrelated entities whose parts have lives beyond this role. So I'm made up of parts. I have hands and arms and legs, etc. And if I do something, it must be through my parts. But these parts don't have a life beyond me. These parts are simply my parts. On the other hand, if group agents exist, if group entities of certain kinds exist, then their parts have lives beyond their role within them, both whether it's people that have their lives beyond the role, or if it's, say, legal structures that have lives beyond their role as explaining these group agents. So that means to try to reflect on a group's internal nature to determine what to say about groups is to miss the mark. It's just to not be able to look at the right things to answer the questions we want. Now, this is not to say that theory commitments correctly counts as realism, although several examples I've given seem to suggest they want to take realism, and truthmaker incorrectly counts as anti-realism. Okay, I think that debate is not settled. I don't want to suggest that it's settled by our consideration of methods here. I am neutral for the moment on that question. Rather, what I want to say is that truthmaker is ill-placed to consider whether a sparse theory is sufficient to render these interconnected notions explicable. It's simply not well-placed to answer the question that we want to ask. Okay, it's not well-placed to deal with this area of inquiry. Now, I don't have time to go into the implications of this. I think we can ask questions about where we go from here. If we think truthmaker is not suited to social ontology, what does that tell us about applying the lessons more broadly? But I'll just leave that there for now. References are here. And just finally, thank you for your attention in listening and watching. And thank you to the organizers for making this event possible.